All right, we now have joining us on the Soccer Hour on 810 KSFO, brought to you by your NorCal Honda dealers. It is Jeff Carlisle of ESPN. Jeff, what's going on, man? How are you doing?
I'm doing well yourself.
Just getting ready for one of the two crazy times of my years when the hockey world and MLS seasons overlap. But it's a good crazy. I wanted to start out just asking you about the United States men's national team as we're starting to get our looks of what this team is under Pochettino. What are your initial takeaways, or what even do we start trying to look for?
Um, I think, you want to see, first of all, which players are in and which ones are out. I think about a guy like Mark McKenzie. He seems to have made the most of his opportunities at center back. He was a guy that was previously really on the fringes of the first choice roster, if you will. And so, I think he's a guy that's really, again, taking advantage of his chance. Um, we'll see what happens when some guys get their first looks with Pochettino. I'm thinking of a guy like Tyler Adams because he was injured for a lot of the last half of last year.
Mhm.
Now he's back with Bournemouth and is getting a regular run of games. And I think he's going to be really key to what Pochettino wants to do going forward because I think he just offers a lot of tactical flexibility. You can play with a single pivot. Guys can start to take more risks, as they go forward because they know that a guy with Adams' range is going to be able to put out a lot of fires. So, and then, there's been some tactical wrinkles too. You've seen, some center back or some defenders slide into midfield when the U.S. is in possession. I think you saw that in the Jamaica game. So, and certainly the second leg of that two-leg tie was when we saw the U.S. at its most dynamic under Pochettino, I would say. And but now there's some big challenges. The Nations League is coming up in March. Panama is going to be a team that is going to be a stern test as the U.S. found out in Copa America. But even before that, Panama's been a team that's given the U.S. a lot of trouble in the past. And so, it'll be interesting to see what tactical wrinkles Pochettino throws at them, and then whoever's in the final. So, it's important because there's just not that many competitive games on the calendar for the U.S. heading into the World Cup. So I think Pochettino and his staff and the players need to maximize their opportunities and their time together in order to make sure that the U.S. is, at full speed heading into the World Cup.
The issue you alluded to there was not a lot of competitive games for the U.S. heading into this cycle. Is it a bad thing that they don't have to qualify this time around? I mean, I know that it takes the pressure off, but it takes the pressure off. Whereas before they had to find their form, they don't have to this time. And I mean, I guess you could make an argument either way, but where do you fall on this?
Um, I think steel sharpens steel. And so when you're in, hyper competitive environments, especially on the road in CONCACAF, I mean, people like to downplay how hard CONCACAF is. And for sure, if you're talking about qualifying for a World Cup, it's a region that the U.S. should be able to qualify out of. I mean, obviously, we saw in 2018 there are no guarantees. So that said, it is pressure. It is, these are tough environments. I mean, going down to places like El Salvador. I mean, yes, it's a team the U.S. should beat, but that doesn't make it easy. And then obviously you've got teams like Panama and Canada and Mexico who have proven to be very difficult opponents. So I think the U.S. would be better off if they had a qualifying schedule, but you know, Pochettino has to deal with realities, and so he's in a situation where he can experiment. He can get a look at his players without so much of a microscope and without so much at stake. I mean, the Gold Cup is going to be very important. That's happening this summer. I mean, I talked about the Nations League earlier. That's only two games over a short window. When we're talking Gold Cup, that's going to be a longer camp, a longer run up. There'll be some friendlies before the actual Gold Cup starts. And so, all of those games are going to be crucial to the U.S. preparation and just making sure that Pochettino knows what he's got, knows what his options are. And, that's kind of an ongoing process right now.
The man at the helm of the San Jose Earthquakes, Bruce Arena, was at the helm of the U.S. when they did not qualify for the 2018 cycle. A lot of the criticism at the time was surrounding his use of MLS players. That's a conversation that's been in the vogue in the last year of playing guys who are in form or playing guys who are on teams in the best leagues. For Pochettino, is that going to influence his decision making, or does it just go down to the best squad that he can put on the pitch and the best players?
I mean, I think it's going to be the best players in the moment. And every situation is different. I mean, you look at the goalkeeping situation, and Matt Turner is not getting games. I think Ethan Horvath is struggling. So, we'll see what Zach Steffen is able to do, with another year under his belt in Colorado. I mean, obviously he was getting a lot of playing time, but he had to share the struggles too. So, it's going to be interesting to see, how things like that transpire. But I think Pochettino's a guy he's a very competitive guy. Most coaches are, but I think he's an individual that wants his team to be competitive and wants to win. And so, I think he's going to look at each and every situation and just try to figure out what's best for the team. Might that involve an MLS player? It might. Again, we'll see what happens. You know, but I'm not a believer that, John Tolkien all of a sudden became a better player because he made a transfer to the Bundesliga with Holstein Kiel. So, I think he's the same guy that he was before. But, again, Pochettino will go down his list. He's getting more data on the guys, on the MLS guys that are in the January camp right now. And so he's going to weigh his options and come up with a roster that he thinks works.
As we broach the MLS topic, I wanted to go to San Diego first before I get into a couple others. But what do you think of what San Diego is doing in terms of their roster construction and in terms of how they're approaching as they are the latest team to join Major League Soccer?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think, the addition of Luca De La Torre, a U.S. international, I mean, I think that helps them a lot. They had Chucky Lozano. They're starting to bring in some more, DP players. But I mean, if I were to pick between them struggling and them, being a playoff team, I think they're going to struggle. I mean, I still think there's something to be said about creating some chemistry. Now, St. Louis managed to do very well in their first year. But then, they kind of reverted to their level, I think, in year two. And so it'll be interesting to see, how things go in San Diego. I mean, obviously, there'll be a lot of enthusiasm. It is a soccer town. I mean, the Liga MX side, Cholos, is just over the border. And, I know lots of people cross the border to go to their games from the U.S. So, that'll be an interesting dynamic, I think, to the area. But, there's not a whole lot of experience in the MLS in their front office outside of Tom Penn. And, granted, he has a good eye for what works and what doesn't, but he's also more on the business side. And so, we'll see how things go in terms of Mikey Veras and his staff and kind of his first foray really in coaching full-fledged professionals. And I mean, he was very involved in the youth ranks. It's not that he wasn't coaching professionals then, but I mean, it's going to be the full gamut now. So, I think there'll be a learning curve for sure, and there'll be some growing pains. So, I wouldn't expect them to make the playoffs this year, but hey, it's happened in the past, so we'll have to see.
I'm trying to think of the recent, MLS expansion teams that were able to create relative sustained success. Atlanta, they made the playoffs in year one and then ended up winning the championship, but then they regressed. LAFC, although they had a brief regression, they're the team that's been able to stay most closely to the top. I mean, am I just describing the argument that, yeah, you better spend big or else you're going to have to go through those growing pains?
Yeah, but I think it all comes down to, a lot of experience and expertise. And in Atlanta, you had Tata Martino. You had a manager who had been around the block a few times. You had Paul McDonough as GM. I mean, he was very familiar with the U.S. soccer landscape. You look at Charlotte, and they didn't do as well. And so, I think they've struggled a little bit more to kind of make their mark. I mean, I think things are improving for them. But obviously right out of the gate, they didn't have a lot of success. Um, you know, Nashville did well for a while. Miami struggled initially. Yeah, I think they did make the playoffs their first year barely, but that was the COVID year when it seemed like everybody got in. So, it's again, I think it helps to have a lot of MLS experience. LAFC had Bob Bradley to rely on.
Right.
I mean, that guy knows American soccer backwards and forwards. So, I think that's kind of the common thread. Even in Nashville, I mean, you looked at a manager like Gary Smith, who won an MLS Cup. I mean, he knew what it took to win in this league.
Yeah.
So, I think that's kind of the what is probably the best predictor of success. But everything I'm hearing about Mikey Veras is he's a talented coach, a guy on the rise. So, again, we'll have to see how he handles things in his first season.
Do we have any idea what's going to happen with Neymar?
I would say at the moment it's looking more and more like if he goes anywhere, he'll go to Santos.
Hmm.
That's the club that he
Right.
broke into the pro ranks with. Obviously, a lot of fondness there. He won a Copa Libertadores with them, and so I think that's more likely than Chicago. But I said that about the Leo Messi chase plenty of times. I mean, obviously Messi's preference was to go back to Barcelona, but that didn't work out, and so Inter Miami proved to be in the right place at the right time, and so that could that happen with Chicago? It could. I do think there are a lot of questions as to Neymar's health and fitness and his ability to carry on. But
Yeah, I
we'll
saw
see
he'd
what
only
happens
played
with that.
20 games since the 22 World Cup cycle.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
he's played only like 7 games for Al Hilal in Saudi Arabia. Scored 1 goal in the Champions League, and then he was on international duty when he got hurt. So
right.
um, yeah, he's hardly played at all, and he's not registered for the Saudi League. The only games that Neymar can play in right now are in the Asian Champions League. So, that is, you know, something to keep an eye on. I mean, and that has to be weighed very delicately if you're thinking about bringing a player like him on. Obviously, soccer royalty, very talented,
Yeah.
but we'll have to wait and see what happens.
You were there last Wednesday, well, a week ago from the time of this recording, when the Earthquakes had their media day as well as the introductory press conference for both Chicho Arango and Joseph Martinez. What were your impressions first of just the atmosphere on the training pitch and Bruce Bradley chatting it up with all the media? Obviously the Earthquakes are coming off a historically bad season, not just for themselves, but for the league.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything around the Quakes right now is just a lot more interesting, orders of magnitude more interesting than they were a year ago. I think, when you bring in a player or I'm sorry, a coach of Bruce Arena's pedigree, you're gonna pay attention. And obviously his history in the league is one where he knows how to put teams together. And so, obviously the Quakes made a run at Brandon Vasquez. That didn't work out. He went to Austin. But Chicho Arango, that is a good bit of business because if I'm not mistaken, Real Salt Lake paid like 6 million in allocation money for
Right.
him a year ago, and the Quakes were able to get him for 1.5 million. So that to me is fantastic. And if you've got Hernan Lopez, if you've got Christian Espinoza, I mean that's a ready-made supply line to feed a guy like Arango. And then you've got Joseph Martinez, who um, showed some flashes of his old self towards the end of last year.
Mhm.
I don't think he's a 90-minute player week in, week out, but he's not a bad guy to bring off the bench late in the game if you're in need of a goal.
Yeah.
And he's a guy who's proven that he can sniff out goals in MLS. And so, um, you know, to me, the big question is defensively, what's going to happen? I mean, I think there's been obviously some reinforcements brought in midfield. I mean, we'll see what goes on with Carlos Gruezo, whether he stays or goes. Um, but it's not a complete package yet.
Yeah.
But I think that this team is far better than it was a year ago, I think. And so And I think Bruce Arena will continue to try to build this roster and bring guys in. I mean, we've still got over a month to go until the regular season starts, so there's still time.
What do you think they're going to do at left wing? Because Amal Pellegrino was the acquisition of the previous offseason. He played left wing. He was not amazing. He was not awful. He had six-ish goals, I want to say, off the top of my head. But that, in terms of their attack, would seemingly be the big question mark right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, some guys adapt right away, and some guys it takes a while. And so, we'll again, I think it's one of those wait and see things. But I think Bruce Arena is not going to have a ton of patience. For a player that has been in the league a year and ought to know the ins and outs. Um, it's in terms of their options. I mean, yeah, we'll see if what exactly they do in terms of like whether it's a kind of a midfield trident, in attack, or whether they go 4-4-2. I mean, when I asked Joseph Martinez and Chicho Arango, who's going to start, they said Arango said, why not both? So, that can impact things tactically as well. But I got to believe that Pellegrino's on a short leash. I mean, he really does need to produce and produce quickly. So, but sometimes these moves, like bringing in Arango, bringing in Joseph Martinez, sometimes it has a ripple effect, and teams find that they can't really focus on him. Like, okay, we're not gonna let this guy beat us. We're gonna make somebody else beat us. I mean, now granted, Christian Espinoza is probably that guy more than Pellegrino, but when you've got more attacking pieces with a history of success, it makes it harder for teams to kind of pin down what's going to happen. And so again, Arena will make his judgments and go from there.
Christian Espinosa has to be licking his chops, right? I mean, this is a guy who, all but really the 2023 season, when he had 13 goals and 13 assists and got some MVP talk because the Quakes were in the playoffs, he's been, buried under either bigger stars with the Quakes like Chris Wondolowski or even Matias Almeida, but he's been one of Major League Soccer's most consistent producers, albeit on a, underwhelming San Jose side. Now he's got two of the top finishers in the league up there, as well as Hernan Lopez playing in the 10, and whatever happens in terms of the, the left wing. I mean, I figure he's probably due for something close to a career year, which is saying something for a guy who's pretty much guaranteed to have double-digit assists.
Yeah, I mean, Christian Espinoza is probably one of the league's best kept secrets. I mean, granted, for people that watch the league regularly, when they watch San Jose, they probably recognize him as the danger man. But yeah, I mean, he's the supporting cast around him has not been near good enough. And so, I think the Quakes are a lot closer to providing him with that. And yeah, he's got to be loving playing with a guy like Chicho Arango, because I mean, Arango's movement, his ability to finish, I mean, even a half chance, again, that permeates the rest of the side, and that's going to make everybody better. So I think Espinoza's definitely got to be very happy with the developments with the Quakes. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of potential out there, but also a lot of new faces, and so we'll see how quickly all those new faces gel, because that might take a little bit of time. But listen, Arango's been with two different teams in MLS, LAFC and then Real Salt Lake, and he did well with both teams. Now, granted, towards the end of last year, he faded a little bit. There was that suspension, which I think hung over him a little bit.
Right.
But that proves to me that the guy is adaptable, and so I think in San Jose he's got two players in Lopez and Espinoza who are going to be able to find him.
I know you talked about the fact that both Martinez and Arango were giving the right answers when they were talking about the team's success first. Obviously Joseph Martinez is a little bit later in his career than Arango, but both of them seem to be enjoying each other's company. And I don't think that there's like your question, who's going to start. Joseph Martinez alluded to the fact that he, was not going to be the full 90 guy, but it feels like that can be a nice relationship between the two. And it also gives Bruce Arena the ability to rotate the roster, which is something that, for a while, the Earthquakes haven't had a lot of bench depth. I mean, I think back to when they could bring Danny Houston on if they were going to take off a Wando. Otherwise, they have not had, really a great, number two option as at a striker position. I mean, they had Jeremy Abobasi, but then it was going to Preston Judd, and he only had one goal last year. So this gives San Jose the ability to maybe shake up their looks and even just give themselves a little bit of a boost later in games, which was where under the Luchi Gonzalez era, they were losing a lot of games.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if Martinez accepts that role. I mean, he's all goal scorers have huge egos. They might not always show it, but they want to be on the field. They want to be the guy. And there have been moments in Martinez's MLS career where he's not always accepted that, even as he was dealing with his injuries. So, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, it's early days yet. The Arena hasn't had to make any tough decisions yet. So, not that he's not adept at making them, but that's gonna be a situation that I think he's gonna have to manage on an ongoing basis. And so, but yeah, it's great for the team to have that kind of pedigree coming off of the bench and kind of giving teams something to think about. And so, yeah, I mean, it's always good to have more attacking options. Sure, it's a challenge to kind of put them all together into a cohesive unit, but again, I think the Quakes are in a better position to maybe throw some wrinkles at teams than they were last year.
With Nick Lima coming in, with Dave Romney coming in, and in the midfield, Ian Harkes and Mark Anthony Kaye. Can Bruce Arena? He doesn't need them to be the best defense in the world, but can he use those guys to make the defense significantly better than it was last year? Because I don't know what exactly happened, because in 2023 under Lucci, the Earthquakes were stout defensively, particularly at home. They had one of the best home winning percentages or just point totals, and they didn't give up a lot of goals. Whereas last year, they just bled goals everywhere. I couldn't figure out if that was structural or identity or what it was, but do you think Bruce Arena at least has some of the pieces he needs just to calm things down?
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, what they set a record, I think, for most goals conceded in a season. So, I mean, they can't do much worse.
Well, but
Yeah,
I'm not trying to be, an antagonist here, but they gave up the most goals in 2018.
right.
They gave up the most goals in 2020. They gave up the most goals, I believe, in 2022, and then again in 2024. I mean, this is for a team that was for so long identified, with the Goonies and the tight wins and the, almost the Dominic Kinnear style of eking out 2-1 or 1-0 victories in the post-Dom Kinnear era of this team. They have not been a defensive first program.
No, I mean, they haven't. And so, I mean, I think some of that's personnel. I mean, I don't think they got a good year out of Daniel last year. I mean, especially early on. I mean, the goalkeeping was just not good at all. And so, we'll see, if with Daniel kind of coming into the year healthy, I think that will help, no doubt. And I think the triangle between the two center backs and the midfield, the holding midfielder, that just wasn't good enough. I mean, I think Gruetzo, not to pick on him, but listen, I've seen it a bunch of times where there's a big international tournament in the summer and guys are playing not to get hurt.
Yeah.
And so, I think either physically or subconsciously, I think that was a factor as well. I mean, if you just look at kind of the duels won and the tackling percentage, I mean, Gruetzo's numbers were way down. And so, that was kind of shocking to me. But, basically you've got to have guys on the same page and willing to put in the time. And so, we'll see. I think Romney is a huge improvement. I mean, he's a veteran guy. He knows what it takes to win in the league. He's another guy who's had success in multiple places. So I think that bodes well. I've always liked Mark Anthony Kaye's game. I mean, granted, he is getting a little bit older. And we'll see, what a guy like Ian Harkes can do. Again, I don't think Arena's done in this area. So, I do think that part of the field needs some shoring up. But yeah, I mean, I do think they'll be better this year. And listen, I mean, I think Arena, again, he's a guy who knows how to put pieces together. I mean, I remember talking to Steve Cherundolo years ago, just about what made Arena such a good manager, and he just said he had an uncanny ability to find which guys would work well together, whether it was a right midfielder and a right back, or two center backs, or two guys playing in midfield. He had just such an understanding of what would work, and so I think that will play in San Jose really well. I mean, I think that will help the team out a lot in terms of its performance on the field.
So what are your expectations then? Are they looking at is playoff the bar, getting in that top 9 so they can get into a playoff game? Or do you think they should be aiming higher for, a 5, 6, 7 spot to where they can be guaranteed to host a playoff game? Because that still hasn't happened in the history of PayPal Park since it opened in 2015.
Right. I mean, listen, I think, you got to take, baby steps. I mean, I think, making the playoffs is certainly doable. I think there's some upheaval with a lot of teams. I'm looking at Dallas and trying to figure out what they're doing. Getting rid of guys like Paul Arriola and Jesus Ferreira. We'll see. You'll see how San Diego does. We'll see how competitive they are out of the gate. I mean, I do think the Quakes are capable of making the playoffs. I mean, from the very beginning, Bruce Arena has said that this roster was a lot better than it showed last year.
Yeah.
And when he says that, I think he's looking at guys like Espinoza, Lopez, and certainly in attack, the Quakes have been able to, they look, definitely playoff caliber. Again, we'll see how the defense goes, but I think adding a guy like Romney, kind of a no-nonsense defender, not flashy, just super effective.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to go a long way towards helping this team on the defensive end. So whether they can get into like the 5, 6, 7 area, I mean, first things first. Let's let's make the playoffs first, and then we can, the Quakes can start thinking about, home field advantage and things like that.
And I guess I lied about one last question, just to ask about Romney as an acquisition, Lima as an acquisition, even looking at a guy like Arango. Like I've said about, Romney and Lima, there's a little bit of a red ass about them. And I think Arango can be a little hot too. And I think that's something that the Earthquakes were lacking. They need a little bit more of the pushback, getting guys' faces, don't take any guff from anyone. I think that was lacking. And I know people always look back at the 2012 with, Gordo and Lenny and the way they acted on the field to where nobody wanted to play against them. But I think for the culture in San Jose, I think they need more of that pushback on the pitch.
No, I agree. And I think, he's not the most demonstrative guy, at least, when I've seen him play, but he's no nonsense.
Yeah.
He's going to put in his shift. He's gonna put in the full 90, 6, 7 out of 10 every time out. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's going to give a little bit more bite, to the team. And yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's something that's been missing, and I think that's something that Arena is trying to address with the acquisitions that he's brought in.
Well, Jeff, I appreciate your time as always. Keep up the great work, man, and I'll see you soon.
All right, thanks.